It was a chilly evening in the bustling city. Cars zoomed past, their headlights reflecting off the wet streets, while people hurried along the sidewalks, wrapped in coats and scarves. On a quiet corner near a luxury restaurant, a young homeless girl named Mia sat on an old blanket. She was only 12 years old, with tangled hair and a small backpack that held all her belongings. Despite her situation, Mia had sharp eyes and an even sharper sense of awareness. She often observed the people passing by, imagining what their lives might be like. That evening, the restaurant was particularly busy. Wealthy patrons dressed in elegant suits and gowns stepped out of sleek cars, greeted by doormen who held the doors open with polished smiles. Mia watched them, not with envy, but with curiosity. She often wondered how people could have so much while others, like her, had so little. Still, she didn't complain. Life had taught her to survive and to rely on her instincts. As she sat quietly near the back entrance of the restaurant, waiting for the kind chef who sometimes gave her leftover food, a sleek black car pulled up. Out stepped a tall, silver-haired man in a sharp suit. He carried himself with confidence, and Mia instantly recognized him. It was James Thornton, the billionaire who owned several companies in the city. She had seen his face on billboards and in newspapers. Beside him was a stunning woman in a sparkling dress, his wife, Veronica. Mia couldn't help but notice how different they seemed. Mr. Thornton's face looked kind, though tired, as if he carried a weight no one else could see. Veronica, on the other hand, walked with an air of cold confidence, her smile more of a mask than a genuine expression. They entered the restaurant together, but something about their interaction seemed off to Mia. Veronica walked ahead without waiting for her husband, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Mia's curiosity was piqued, but she stayed where she was, her focus shifting back to her wait for food. A few moments later, she heard voices coming from the back alley. Quietly, she crept closer, her small figure hidden in the shadows. Veronica was on the phone, her voice low but tense. "I don't care what it takes," she said sharply. "It needs to happen tonight. Make sure it's done." Mia froze, her heart racing. She didn't understand everything Veronica was saying, but the words sent a chill down her spine. "It needs to happen tonight" sounded ominous, and Mia's instincts told her this wasn't something innocent. She watched as Veronica ended the call and walked briskly back into the restaurant. Mia's mind was spinning. What did those words mean? Was something bad going to happen? She didn't know for sure, but one thing was clear. She couldn't ignore it. Whatever was going on inside that restaurant, she had to stay close and find out. Something told her this was no ordinary evening. Mia sat back down on her old blanket, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. She couldn't shake the strange words she had overheard from Veronica. It needs to happen tonight. What could she have meant? Mia didn't know much about the world of the rich, but she knew when something felt wrong. Her instincts, sharpened by years of living on the streets, told her this was no ordinary conversation. As she sat there, trying to piece things together, the back door of the restaurant opened. The kind chef, a middle-aged man with a warm smile, stepped out holding a small paper bag. "Hey, Mia," he said kindly, handing her the bag. "I saved you some leftovers. Make sure you eat something warm tonight." Mia smiled, grateful as always. "Thank you, Mr. Robert," she said softly. She opened the bag and saw a small piece of bread and some pasta. It wasn't much, but to her, it was a feast. But before she could take a bite, she noticed Veronica stepping into the kitchen from the back door. Curious, Mia peeked through the crack in the door to see what was happening. Veronica was standing next to one of the restaurant's chefs, a serious-looking man in a white coat. She leaned in close, her voice low, but Mia could hear her clearly. "Make sure my husband's dish is prepared exactly as I asked," Veronica said, her tone sharp. "It's very important." The chef nodded, though he looked a bit confused. "Of course, ma'am. Is there anything specific you'd like added?" Veronica reached into her small handbag and pulled out a tiny vial filled with a clear liquid. She held it out to the chef and whispered something Mia couldn't quite hear. The chef hesitated for a moment before reluctantly taking the vial. Veronica smiled coldly and left the kitchen. Mia's heart raced. She didn't know much, but she knew this wasn't right. Why would someone add a mysterious liquid to someone else's food? Was it medicine? Or was it something worse? She didn't have all the answers, but her gut told her she couldn't ignore this. She watched as the chef, looking uneasy, carefully poured the liquid into one of the dishes. The plate was then placed on a tray alongside other dishes, ready to be served. Maya's eyes followed the tray as a waiter picked it up and carried it out toward the dining area. Her stomach churned, but not from hunger. She knew she had to do something, but what could a homeless girl like her do in a place like this? No one would listen to her, and if she caused a scene, they might throw her out. But Mia couldn't sit back and do nothing. She thought about the kind-looking man she had seen earlier, James Thornton. He didn't seem like a bad person, and if someone was trying to hurt him, she couldn't let it happen. Gathering her courage, she stood up and slipped through the back door into the restaurant. Her heart pounded as she weaved through the busy kitchen, unnoticed by the staff. She peeked into the dining area and saw Mr. Thornton sitting at a table with Veronica, the plate of food now in front of him. Veronica wore a fake smile, but her eyes gleamed with something cold and calculating. Mia clenched her fists. She didn't know how, but she was determined to warn Mr. Thornton before it was too late. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, knowing this moment could change everything. Mia's small frame slipped through the bustling dining area unnoticed at first. The clinking of silverware and the quiet hum of conversations filled the elegant restaurant. Chandeliers sparkled above, casting a warm golden glow over the tables where the wealthy patrons dined. Maya felt out of place, her tattered clothes and messy hair a sharp contrast to the polished guests. But her determination was stronger than her fear. At the center of the room, she spotted the man she had come to warn. James Thornton sat at a round table with his wife, Veronica, directly across from him. The plate of food was now in front of him, beautifully arranged by the chef. Mr. Thornton looked relaxed, chatting politely with Veronica, who wore an unsettlingly sweet smile. To everyone else, they appeared to be the perfect couple, but Mia knew something wasn't right. Her heart pounded as she worked her way closer to their table, dodging waiters carrying trays of food and glasses of wine. She felt the weight of the stares from other diners as they noticed her. Whispers began to ripple through the room. "What's a girl like her doing in here?" someone murmured. Maya didn't care. She couldn't stop now. Finally, she reached the edge of Mr. Thornton's table. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her eyes wide with urgency. "Please don't eat that. Your wife, she put something in your food." The dining room fell silent. All eyes turned to Mia, who stood trembling but determined. Veronica's face froze for a moment, her smile slipping, before she quickly recovered. "What is this nonsense?" she said sharply, her tone dripping with annoyance. "Who let this girl in here?" James Thornton looked startled but calm. He put his fork down and turned to Mia, his kind eyes meeting hers. "What are you talking about, young lady?" he asked gently, sensing her fear. Maya took a step closer, her voice rising as she tried to explain. "I saw her. She gave the chef something, a little bottle, and told him to put it in your food. I think it's poison." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Veronica's face turned pale, and she stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "She's just a street kid looking for attention. She's lying." But Mia didn't back down. "I'm not lying," she cried, her voice cracking. "I heard you. You said, 'It needs to happen tonight.' You were talking about him." Mr. Thornton's expression shifted. He studied Mia carefully, then turned to his wife, his sharp gaze narrowing. "Veronica," he said slowly, his voice calm but firm. "Is there something you'd like to explain?" Veronica faltered, her confident facade beginning to crack. "James, this is absurd," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You're not seriously listening to this girl, are you?" But James wasn't looking at her anymore. He gestured for a waiter. "Bring the chef here," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Maya stood still, her heart racing. She had done everything she could to warn him, but now she had to wait and see if he believed her. The entire restaurant was watching, the tension thick in the air. Veronica sat back down, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her eyes darting nervously around the room. As the chef approached the table, wiping his hands nervously on his apron, Mia felt a glimmer of hope. She had spoken up, and now the truth might finally come out. The chef, a middle-aged man with a crisp white uniform and a nervous look on his face, approached Mr. Thornton's table. The entire restaurant was silent, the air heavy with tension. Maya stood next to the table, her small frame trembling but her eyes locked on Mr. Thornton. She had done her part, and now she could only hope that the truth would come to light. "Chef," Mr. Thornton began, his voice calm but firm, "this young lady has made a serious claim. She says my wife asked you to add something to my food. Is that true?" The chef hesitated, glancing nervously at Veronica, who was glaring at him with a look that could cut through steel. He swallowed hard, clearly torn. "Sir, I don't know what this girl is talking about," he stammered. "Your wife only asked me to prepare the dish in a specific way." Mia's heart sank. She could tell the chef was scared to tell the truth. She stepped forward, her voice strong despite her fear. "I saw her give you a small bottle," she insisted. "You poured something from it into his food. Please, just tell the truth." The chef's hands fidgeted with his apron as his eyes darted between Mia, Mr. Thornton, and Veronica. Finally, under the weight of Mr. Thornton's piercing gaze, he sighed. "Sir," he said quietly, "your wife did give me a vial of liquid and asked me to add it to your dish. She said it was just a special ingredient to enhance the flavor." The room erupted in gasps. Veronica shot up from her chair, her voice loud and defensive. "This is ridiculous. James, can't you see what's happening? This girl is lying, and now he's trying to cover for her. Are you really going to believe a street kid over your own wife?" But Mr. Thornton wasn't listening to Veronica anymore. His sharp mind was already piecing things together. He looked at the chef. "Where is this vial now?" he asked. The chef, clearly uneasy, reached into his apron pocket and pulled out a small, clear bottle. He handed it to Mr. Thornton, who inspected it closely. The liquid inside was colorless, but something about it made his stomach churn. "I want this tested," he said firmly, handing it to a nearby waiter. "Call someone immediately." Veronica's mask of confidence was starting to slip. She reached out, her voice suddenly soft and pleading. "James, you're overreacting. It was nothing. I just wanted to make sure the dish was perfect for you." But Mr. Thornton's expression was stone cold. "Enough, Veronica," he said, his voice steady but filled with disappointment. "If this was harmless, you wouldn't be so defensive. And this girl," he gestured toward Mia, "had no reason to lie. She risked everything to warn me." Mia felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone believed her. She stood silently as the staff moved quickly to test the contents of the vial. Veronica sat back down, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. The crowd in the restaurant whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between Veronica and Mr. Thornton. As they waited for the results, Mr. Thornton turned to Mia. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Mia," she replied softly, feeling a little more at ease. "Well, Mia," he said, "thank you for speaking up. You might have saved my life tonight." Her heart swelled at his words. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen and valued. But the night wasn't over yet. Everyone was waiting for the truth, and Mia knew this moment would change everything. The entire restaurant held its breath as the vial was whisked away by the head waiter to be tested. James Thornton sat silently, his face calm but unreadable. His piercing gaze remained fixed on Veronica, who now looked visibly shaken. Maya stood to the side, feeling a mixture of relief and nerves. She had done what she could, but the tension in the room was almost too much for her to bear. Veronica, sensing her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, leaned forward in her chair. Her voice was low and shaky, but she tried to maintain her composure. "James, this is absurd," she said, forcing a smile. "It was just a harmless ingredient. You're letting this child spin a ridiculous story." James finally turned to look at her, his expression cool and measured. "A harmless ingredient, Veronica? Then why didn't you mention it to me earlier? Why instruct the chef to keep it a secret?" Veronica opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The other diners, who had been whispering among themselves, now sat in silence, watching the drama unfold as if it were a scene from a movie. Minutes later, the head waiter returned, holding a small device and a report in his hands. His face was grim, and the air seemed to grow even heavier. He approached Mr. Thornton and spoke quietly but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Sir, the liquid in the vial contains traces of a toxic substance. It's not safe for consumption." The gasps from the crowd were audible, and Maya felt her stomach drop, even though she had suspected something was wrong. Hearing the confirmation made it all feel real. Veronica's face turned pale, and she clutched the edge of the table, her composed mask now completely gone. James stood up slowly, his tall frame towering over the table. His voice was calm but carried a cold edge. "Veronica," he said, his tone sharp, "what have you done?" Veronica's hands trembled, but she tried one last time to salvage the situation. "James, it's not what you think. I didn't mean to hurt you. It was just a mistake." "A mistake," James replied, his voice rising slightly for the first time. "You gave the chef a vial of poison and told him to add it to my food. That's not a mistake, Veronica. That's attempted murder." The entire restaurant seemed to collectively hold its breath. Veronica, unable to meet her husband's eyes, slumped back in her chair, her face drained of color. James turned to the head waiter. "Call the authorities," he said firmly. "This is no longer a private matter." Mia watched as the staff sprang into action, calling the police and clearing the area around Mr. Thornton's table. She felt a strange mix of emotions, relief that she had done the right thing, but also sadness for what she had just witnessed. Even though Veronica had been cruel, Mia couldn't help but feel sorry for her. James walked over to Mia and knelt to her eye level. His expression softened as he spoke. "Mia, you were brave tonight. You didn't have to say anything, but you chose to speak up. You saved my life, and I'll never forget that." Mia felt tears welling up in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude. For the first time in a long time, someone was thanking her. Someone saw her as more than just a homeless girl on the street. As the police arrived and escorted Veronica out of the restaurant, the other diners applauded softly. Maya didn't know what would happen next, but she knew her life was about to change forever. The flashing lights of the police cars lit up the street outside the restaurant as officers led Veronica away in handcuffs. The once elegant dining room was now abuzz with murmurs and whispers, the diners unable to contain their shock at what they had just witnessed. Maya stood quietly, still processing everything that had happened. She glanced at James Thornton, who was now speaking calmly with the police, his composed demeanor unshaken despite the gravity of the situation. As the officers finished taking statements, one of them, a kind-looking woman, approached Mia. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked gently, kneeling down to her level. "What you did tonight was very brave." Mia nodded, her voice soft but steady. I didn't want him to get hurt." The officer smiled warmly. "You did the right thing, and because of you, Mr. Thornton is safe." Nearby, James had finished speaking with another officer and walked over to Mia, His tall figure seemed less intimidating now as he crouched down beside her. "Mia," he began, his voice filled with gratitude. "You saved my life tonight. I don't even know how to thank you." Mia shifted uncomfortably, not used to such attention. I heard her talking and I knew something was wrong. I didn't want you to get hurt." James nodded, his eyes kind. "Not many people would have done what you did. You're brave and smart, and you stood up for what was right, even when it was hard." The restaurant manager approached them then, holding a warm plate of food. "Here, Mia," she said kindly. "You deserve this after everything you've done tonight. It's on the house." Mia hesitated before taking the plate, her stomach growling quietly. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. James watched her eat, a thoughtful expression on his face. He had spent his life surrounded by wealth and power. But tonight, a homeless girl had shown him a level of courage and selflessness he rarely saw in his world. He realized he couldn't just let her walk away without doing something for her. "Mia," James said after a moment, "where do you live?" Mia looked down at the floor, embarrassed. "I don't have a home," she admitted quietly. "I stay wherever I can." James felt a pang of sadness. He couldn't imagine how difficult her life must have been. "Well, that's going to change," he said firmly. "You've done something extraordinary tonight, and I want to help you." Mia's eyes widened. "Help me? How?" James smiled. "First, let's make sure you have a safe place to stay. Then we'll talk about getting you into school and helping you build the future you deserve." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes. No one had ever offered her something like this before. "Really?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope. "Really," James replied, his tone gentle but certain. "You've helped me, and now it's my turn to help you." The police began to leave, and the restaurant slowly returned to normal. But for Mia, everything had changed. That night, she had found not just safety but hope. Hope for a future she hadn't dared to dream of before. As James arranged for a car to take her to a temporary shelter, he made a promise to himself. He wouldn't just help Mia. He would use his influence and resources to help other children like her. Tonight had opened his eyes to the struggles so many faced, and he was determined to make a difference. For the first time in years, Mia went to sleep in a warm bed, feeling safe and cared for. And for James, it wasn't just about repaying a debt. It was about honoring the courage of a little girl who had reminded him of the power of doing what's right. The next morning, Mia woke up in a cozy bed in a small but clean room at a temporary shelter. Sunlight streamed through the window, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe. The events of the previous night still felt like a dream, but the warm blanket around her and the kind staff at the shelter reminded her it was real. She wasn't on the streets anymore, and someone had cared enough to help her. Downstairs, James Thornton was already waiting to see her. He had come early, dressed in a casual sweater and slacks, looking much less formal than the previous night. When Mia walked into the room, he stood up and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Mia," he said gently. "Did you sleep well?" Mia nodded shyly. "Yes, thank you," she replied. "This is nice. I've never stayed anywhere like this before." James sat back down, motioning for her to join him at the small table. "Well, this is just the beginning," he said. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened last night and what you did. You didn't just save my life. You reminded me how important it is to look out for others." Mia looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" James leaned forward, his tone serious but kind. "I spent so much of my life focused on my businesses and success, but I've ignored the struggles of people like you. Last night, you opened my eyes to something I can't ignore anymore. I want to do more, not just for you, but for others like you." Mia didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. "Why me?" she asked quietly. James smiled. "Because you're brave, Mia. You saw something wrong and spoke up, even when it was scary. That takes a kind of strength that not many people have. At that moment, the shelter manager approached them with a warm smile. "Mr. Thornton," she said, "thank you for your generosity. Your donation will make a huge difference for the children here." Mia's eyes widened. "You donated to the shelter?" James nodded. "This place is doing important work, and I want to support it. But I also want to do something special for you, Mia." He pulled out a small folder and handed it to her. Inside were details about a private school that offered scholarships for underprivileged children. "This school will help you learn, grow, and have the future you deserve," he said. "I've already spoken to them, and they're ready to welcome you." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes. "You're sending me to school?" James nodded. "I am, but it doesn't stop there. I'm also setting up a program to help other kids like you, kids who need a second chance." Mia couldn't believe what she was hearing. For so long, she had felt invisible, just another face in the crowd. But now, someone was not only helping her, but also using her story to help others. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you enough." James smiled, his eyes kind. "You already have, Mia. You reminded me what truly matters." As they sat together, Mia felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For James, it was the start of a new mission, one that would make a difference in countless lives. And for both of them, it was the beginning of a friendship that would change their lives forever.